Jackson Farris was at Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. He was a warrant officer in the U.S. Navy and a gunner. Today, a pipeline worker, he lives with his family in Southern California.
I never thought the Japanese would attack us so far away from their home port. We were just a victim of circumstances. History was against us.
In 1941, Juzo Mori was a petty officer in the Imperial Japanese Navy and the pilot of a Nakajima torpedo bomber. Today, he operates his own small bar in Tokyo.
The attack at Pearl Harbor is mine. It belongs to me. It is my heritage, and no one can take it from me.
At Pearl Harbor, the lives of Juzo Mori and Jackson Farris came together for a brief moment. Two fighting men, one American, one Japanese, relived that moment in history. I'm Jim Bishop. In June 1941, the Japanese government has been working at the conquest of Asia for 7 years. They need oil badly, but oil is to be found to the south. The Japanese do not have the strength to fight two suspicious neighbors, Russia and the United States. On June 22nd, Germany attacks the Soviet Union, and that leaves but one enemy for Japan to face, America. Japan is faced with a problem. To move ahead will be to risk war with the United States. But suppose, just suppose, that the American fleet could be destroyed at anchor. In September 1941, at Kagoshima Bay in southern Kyushu, Japanese carrier pilots begin training for a very special mission. One of the pilots in training is Juzo Mori.
I have been on the board and planes. My torpedo squadron number 11 is Imperial Navy's best. Admiral Yamamoto said so months ago and sent us an official citation for our work.
Although opposed to war with the United States, Japanese naval boss Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto is ordered to prepare for it. The Japanese battle plan includes Thailand, the Malay Peninsula, the Philippines, Singapore, and oil-rich Java. But before any of it, the U.S. fleet must be crushed at Pearl Harbor. For over a year, the attack is planned. When the U.S. Pacific Fleet steamed out of San Diego in May 1940 for maneuvers in Hawaiian waters, it was to have been a round trip. But as tension mounts in the Pacific, Washington orders the fleet to California is 28-year-old warrant officer Jackson Farris. Formerly on the Mississippi, he's a gunner and a spare-time athlete.
I've been aboard the California about a year, caught her in Bremerton. It's a Navy practice to transfer a man when he's promoted to warrant. We call the ship the Prune Barge. I like her. She's Vice Admiral Pye's flagship of the battle force, and we're proud of her. She's a good ship, really a good ship. Good at athletics, gunnery, and engineering. The California takes a back seat to no one.
Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, in September 1941, has been the home port for the bulk of American sea power for almost a year and a half. To protect the fleet, the U.S. Army maintains 2 ground divisions, a force believed powerful enough to block any landing attempt. Keenly aware of shortages, the American military moved personnel and weapons into the base. The Air Corps, operating principally out of Hickam and Wheeler Fields, moves planes in to strengthen the island defenses. Although still in short supply, planes of the Army's Dawn Patrol take a turn at flying reconnaissance. The United States has a war plan, code name Rainbow 5. It is a plan for reaction to a Japanese-initiated war. It would have the Pacific Fleet head for the Philippines, stopping along the way to capture Japanese bases in the Marshalls and Carolines. Not until the Philippines are reached is a decisive naval engagement anticipated.
I'm the warrant gunner for the ship. That means if one of the guns doesn't work, I have to fix it right now. Our gunnery officer is very strict on drills. We have a lot of drills, a lot of maneuvers. We talk about the possibility of war a lot. Most of the men are pretty sure it's coming.
In advance of the force are 27 large submarines. Their job, to reconnoiter and report back advance intelligence, and, during the attack, to sink any ships attempting to escape. Off Pearl Harbor, 5 of these submarines will launch miniature two-man subs designed to slip through harbor defenses on suicidal torpedo missions.
Aboard the flagship Akagi, we are told we are now a task force, and our objective is Pearl Harbor. Now, I see how much like Kagoshima Bay Pearl Harbor is.
On November 26th, the same day Secretary of State Hull presents the final U.S. note to the Japanese demanding that they get out of China, the strike force leaves Tankan Bay, outward bound for Pearl Harbor.
There will be no more sake until we get back to Japan, if we do get back. The weather is very bad. The seas are high and rough. Soryu pitches so much that I feel sorry for the men on the destroyers. Some men are swept overboard when our ship refuels from the tankers.
We were just supposed to be out here on a temporary basis, but it's dragged on and on. We maneuver down to Johnson Island and out towards Midway and around, making a regular circle. It just goes on and on. Some of the admirals have gone to Washington to ask how long we'll be here, but they get the same answer: to wait.
December 2nd, the Hawaii-bound strike force receives an important message from Admiral Yamamoto. He signals, "Climb Mount Niitaka," the code for proceed with attack. The ships move to Condition 2, the second degree of readiness for action.
After the attack at Pearl Harbor, we must make it back to our ship one by one, alone. I am confident of my ability to navigate over the ocean.
For a whole week, we've been out maneuvering and on firing practice. Last night, an unidentified sub was reported, but nothing else happened. Now it's Friday. Most of the men are looking forward to liberty on shore tomorrow.
The strike force is under orders to sink on sight any American, British, or Dutch ship and to board any neutral to prevent radio transmission. Heavy weather and a devious course pay off. The fleet escapes detection. Early the morning of December 7th, the Pearl Harbor strike force reaches its launch point, 275 miles north of Pearl Harbor.
I say a prayer and hope that my mother and 4 brothers will be proud of me this day. A special message comes to us from Admiral Yamamoto. The rise or fall of our empire depends on the outcome of this battle. Each man will complete his duties until his flesh is crushed and his bones become powder. I sit in my plane ready to go. I am happy now and anxious to attack. I have trained very hard for this moment. Everywhere men are cheering us and waving their caps. I am more determined to strike hard at Pearl Harbor and return to my ship a hero.
By 6 a.m., the first wave is off the deck. Pearl Harbor is 2 hours away.
Sleep last night, worrying about the report that there are no enemy aircraft carriers at Pearl Harbor. If I cannot get the carrier, I intend to get the battleship. My torpedo will not be wasted. Our plan of attack has been reviewed many times. If we achieve surprise, the torpedo bombers will go in first. I become afraid. Do the Americans know we are coming? Are they waiting for us and preparing to shoot us all down?
Knocked unconscious, and when I come to, I hear the announcement of a torpedo hit at port side frame 50. I know it's the Japanese. I don't know how I know, but I just do. Making an account for ourselves. I think that some of the older men like me have inspired the younger men.
We are successful. Our attack is a complete success. I'm very happy. I have just hit the great battleship with my torpedo. She must have a huge hole in her side now and is probably thinking. For a moment, I think of the men on that ship, and I am sorry for them. But then I think of the welcome on Soryu when I report I have hit the battleship. My landing gear is damaged. I am told to make a water landing.
I'm being carried from the ship. I don't want to be moved. I think my back is broken and I see some in worse fix than me. I don't want to go to the hospital. This is still a safer place than the hospital right now.
By 10 a.m., it's all over. 18 ships, including all 8 battleships, are sunk or badly damaged. West Virginia, hit by 6 torpedoes, sinks in the mud. Arizona, ripped by one of her own exploding magazines, takes 1,000 burning men to the bottom. Oklahoma, torpedoed 3 times, capsizes in 20 minutes. California, hit by 2 torpedoes and with 1 magazine exploded by a bomb, sinks in the mud. Maryland, shielded by the Oklahoma, survives with damage. Tennessee, bombed and showered by flaming debris from Arizona, will burn all day and all through the night. More than 2,400 Americans are dead, more than 1,100 wounded. And the Pacific has been paralyzed, and the road to conquest for Japan lies open. In a moment, the conclusion of our story. Petty Officer Juzo Mori will later fly missions at Wake Island and Midway. Shot down at Guadalcanal, he loses his right hand, ends the war as a flying instructor. Warrant Officer Jackson Farris, reported missing in action at Pearl Harbor, will later fight at Saipan and Lingayen Gulf, and through to the surrender at Tokyo Bay. For his bravery at Pearl Harbor, he becomes the first man recommended for the Congressional Medal of Honor in World War II. The greatest disaster in American naval history is over.
The harder the war became, the more the crew became welded together. This comradeship still exists among us after so many years, and will probably last as long as we live.
Wilhelm Spar was an officer on a German U-boat during World War II. Today a resident of Hamburg, he is the managing director of a sailing magazine and vice president of the U-Boat Veterans Association. Basil Bleck was an anti-submarine officer on convoy escort duty in the Atlantic. Today an information officer for the British consul, he is presently on duty in the United States.
The battle for England's lifeline was eventually won by suppressing the U-boat. But it was so long, so dreary, so tedious, and one's part was really very small.
In the danger-filled Atlantic, the lives of Lieutenant Spar and Lieutenant Bleck crossed. 2 fighting men, 1 German, 1 Englishman. Relive that moment in history. September the 3rd, 1939. The British passenger liner Athenia, torpedoed by a German U-boat, sinks off the North Irish coast. Of her 1,450 passengers, many in flight from the European war zones, 120 perish. The sinking of the Athenia underlines a brutal fact. Although World War II is but a few hours old, the Battle of the Atlantic has begun. Because German naval strength is inferior to that of the British, heavy reliance is placed on the effectiveness of the Unterseeboot, the deadly U-boat. From the beginning, the objectives are clear to the German High Command. England, an island nation dependent on her shipping for survival, must be strangled into submission. Her lifeline severed and her sea power destroyed. The British Admiralty, gravely alarmed by the tremendous shipping losses, has resorted to various protective measures. Shipping is rerouted, sailings are made in convoys, new detection devices are developed, and top priority is given to the production of escort vessels. On board a corvette, HMS Bassett is a specialist in submarine detection. 33-year-old Lieutenant Basil Bleck.
When the convoy arrives in Halifax, we generally have a week, possibly 10 days off. There is very little to do. We have parties when we hash over what has happened, where each has been, why so-and-so got lost or off course, and one thing and another of that sort. There is always a feeling of intense depression when the convoy starts off. The captains of all the escort ships are told the course the convoys will sail and the evasive actions to be taken. Some of the convoys are terribly slow, down to about 6 knots, and one wonders if we will ever see land again. The trip just seems to go on and on and on. Submarine warfare is a listening warfare. We are allowed to break radio silence only when we make what is called an enemy sighting report, when we have actually come in contact with the enemy. This quiet is probably one of the worst things for the men, being shut off from the world, of constantly having to listen, of having to try and detect the enemy. Luftwaffe takes its toll of the convoys as they near England after a long, precarious voyage. We are nearly always spotted, if not attacked. The anti-aircraft cruiser in the convoy tries to fight them off, but quite a number of the ships are hit.
By the summer of 1940, German bomber attacks on shipping turned the English Channel into a death trap. But it is the U-boat alone that in 10 months accounts for more than 400 British and neutral vessels, the equivalent of over 1 million tons of merchant shipping. By December, U-boats have claimed another 300 Allied ships at a cost to Germany of only 24 submarines.
Frequently, after an attack, we are detached to look for survivors. We drop scramble nets down our sides and steam very gently into the area, moving backwards and forwards over the wreckage. Looking for survivors is very depressing. One sees men drowning, and it is too late for help. We are forbidden to put off small boats, and we aren't allowed to stop because we'll present a sitting target. The survivors come alongside, sometimes in boats, sometimes swimming, and then up the side of the ship on these nets.
Those 42 crew members and can cruise 6,500 nautical miles. Convoy escorts are strengthened by baby flat tops, new explosives, new types of sonar, hydrophones, hedgehogs, and torpedoes all contribute to the mounting total of anti-submarine measures. Still, U-boat successes reached the highest peak of the war in November 1942. 117 Allied ships are sent to the bottom. It is a figure which conceals the fact that more U-boats are being destroyed than ever before. In February of 1943, the British used a new radar for the first time. It operates on a wavelength of 20 centimeters, which German apparatus cannot detect. By day and by night, unsuspecting submarines are pinpointed and attacked by an enemy they cannot see before it is too late. By June, Allied strength with revolutionary scientific methods has sealed the fate of the U-boat. Of the 235 submarines in action, 84 have been destroyed in the last 3 months. Along with the increase in German losses has been a corresponding drop in Allied sinkings. The hunter has, at last, become the hunted. In a moment, the conclusion of our story. In 1944, Lieutenant Wilhelm Spar is transferred to Danzig as a technical advisor in the construction of a more powerful type of U-boat. The war's end will find him in a Hamburg hospital. In the winter of 1943, Lieutenant Basil Bleck is assigned to the staff of General de Gaulle's Free French Forces in London. Later, he is transferred to New York as a naval liaison officer. 1943 marked the turning point in the Battle of the Atlantic. It was then that the U-boat lost the initiative. Yet many months would pass before peace would return to the neutral sea. Kiyomitsu Miyaka, formerly of Okayama, Japan, is a carpenter. Today he lives in Boring, Oregon. In 1941, he was a Japanese Army sergeant in Malaya and Singapore.
When you see a comrade hanging wounded on barbed wire, you feel sympathy and wish to help them. But you can't. You have to face the enemy.
John Samways is a bank messenger in London, England. In 1941, he was a private in the British Army.
We're not acclimated to fighting in a place like Malaya at all. We had a couple of lectures on care of your weapons in the jungle, but that's not much good at a time like this.
At Malaya and Singapore, the lives of John Samways and Kiyomitsu Miyaka came together for a brief moment. Two fighting men, one British, one Japanese, relived that moment in history. In 1939, the British called Singapore impregnable. It is the most heavily armed fortress in the world. It sits on an island off the foot of Malaya and is the key to military dominance in Asia. To the Americans, December 7th, 1941 means Pearl Harbor. To the British, it will always mean Malaya and Singapore. October 1941, Japan completes final preparations for war. A prime objective is Malaya. To take it, the fortress of Singapore must be reduced. With Singapore captured and the American fleet at Pearl Harbor destroyed, Japan will become undisputed master of the Pacific. For more than 100 years, British power has dominated Singapore. For years, British military experts have held that any invasion of Singapore will come from the sea. The world's biggest guns, fixed in the ground, ready for action, guard the south, east, and west approaches to the island. But the Army commander in Singapore, General Sir Arthur Percival, believes that the attack will come over land from the north. He anticipates simultaneous landings at beaches in Siam and northern Malaya, then a drive down the peninsula to Singapore. Under a new defense plan called Matador, British troops would be moved across Siam to defend the beaches against any Japanese invasion. The British troop movement would require 24 hours. Percival is ordered to prepare, but wait. As long as Singapore remains in British hands, Japan's movement to the south is stifled. Singapore stands an invincible barricade between Japan and the raw materials of war. November 1941, British reinforcements arrive at Singapore. One of these men, a private in the East Surrey Regiment, is 22-year-old John Samways.
Singapore is always what you imagine the tropics to be like. A beautiful seashore, huge buildings, everything white and glaring in the sun. It's all music and dance. There's no sign of war. There's no panic or worrying at all. We consider ourselves very fortunate to be sent to Singapore. No blackouts, no bombings, plenty of food, plenty of all the good things. This argument between the Americans and the Japanese, well, that's the Yanks' affair, not ours. The men in my battalion say that one British soldier is as good as 5 Japanese. They can't see, and they're awfully little chaps, so there's nothing to be afraid of.
Japanese invasion plans call for landings at the same beaches marked in the British defense plan Matador. 3 of the toughest divisions in the Imperial Army make up the invasion force. They are specially trained in jungle warfare. One of these men, assigned to the 27th Construction Company, is Sergeant Kiyomitsu Miyaka.
We expect heavy fighting, but there's no great exchange of fire. There's no sound from enemy guns. We wonder, where are the British forces?
British troops cannot get to the beaches in time to stop the Japanese. From nearby Indochina, Japanese planes make their first strike. 4 hours after the first invasion wave lands, Singapore is bombed.
We have no official idea at all how many Japanese have landed. We hear that there are millions of them. The only airplanes we see are Japanese. If only we could see an RAF plane in the sky. It would certainly do wonders for our morale.
There are 158 British planes in Malaya, most of them obsolete handouts on Lend-Lease. Very few get off the ground. Those that do are no match for the highly maneuverable Zero. Only 50 British planes survived the attack. In 24 hours, the air over Malaya and Singapore is Japanese. With their air force crippled, the British are unable to provide fighter protection for the Navy. The battleship Prince of Wales and the battlecruiser Repulse are the only two big ships Britain has in the Far East. On December 10th, they are spotted by Japanese planes. The battle affects the whole strategy of war. For the first time in history, battleships underway at sea are sunk by air power. The strength of the Royal Navy in the Far East is at the blow. British morale is tremendous. With air superiority,
In many cities, there is no mark of war. I see some Japanese barber shops and store signs. It makes me homesick for Japan.
the well-made British roads lend extra speed to the Japanese advance. Demolition tactics fail to stop the blitzkrieg on bicycles. Special construction units rush in to repair bridges for the tanks and trucks to follow. With the engineers working around the clock, bridges are fixed at the rate of 4 and 5 a day.
I work day and night. Because my mind is tense, I do not feel sleepy. We do not eat or sleep for days. While we work, our soldiers catch up on their rest. When we are finished, they can proceed again.
The Japanese battle plan calls for victory in 100 days. In less than 30 days, the Japanese pushed the British halfway down the coast of Malaya. By January 7th, the front lines are within 250 miles of Singapore.
I feel very sorry for the people who live in the battlefield. They are forced to leave their homes and leave many things behind. But I suppose life is the most important thing to a human being.
The speed of the Japanese advance turns the battle into a rout. The British cannot get organized. Untrained in jungle warfare, they are ordered to delay the Japanese as long as possible, destroying anything of use to them, and retreat. There is not a single Allied tank in all of Malaya. British military experts believe that a tank fighting in thick jungle terrain would be useless. Most of the Indian troops, who make up the bulk of the British garrison in the north, have never seen a tank before.
This officer comes yelling, anyone who comes down this road will be Japanese, so shoot. With what? All I've got is 5 rounds of ammunition. That's all I've been issued.
Repeatedly, the Japanese infiltrate the British lines, confusing and panicking the English. By the end of the month, all hope of holding any part of the Malay Peninsula is gone. The British are ordered to withdraw to Singapore. On January 31st, the last of the British troops cross into Singapore. Behind them, the causeway connecting the island to the mainland is blown up.
It's a great relief to get back to Singapore. At last we've reached our haven and we've got no further worries. We're back in the impregnable fortress. Malaya is just a bad memory, a rotten place with jungle and rubber trees. Singapore is civilization and safety. They tell us to start digging defense positions. This is very demoralizing. There are thousands of troops who never left Singapore who could have done this job. They didn't have to wait for us to get back from Malaya.
Singapore's defenses to the south are strong. But looking down from the north, from Malaya, the back door is wide open. The big guns are useless and pointing the wrong way. General Percival spreads his men along the beaches, hoping to prevent the Japanese from getting a foothold on the island. Only 2,500 men protect the narrowest point of the strait. Here, in small boats, 4,000 Japanese will attack in force. February 8, 1942. Japanese General Yamashita decides to invade Singapore. With his supplies running out and his men outnumbered 3-1, his only hope is to force the British into a quick surrender.
The island of Singapore is before our eyes. I watch the burning of oil tanks. The fire reaches out to the sky and burns without end. Our guns line up to face the island. Our men come in great numbers. Our spirits are good.
The Japanese send up an observation balloon to direct their artillery fire. The British have no planes to knock it down. The Japanese drive a deep wedge into the British lines, forcing them to retreat. Soon the entire city is within range of Japanese artillery. 5 days, the Japanese captured the reservoirs and cut off the city's water supply. They seized the high ground looking down on Singapore. Yamashita advises the British to surrender. The British are ordered to keep fighting. Churchill orders his generals to defend Singapore to the death. Surrender, he says, is out of the question. Who's in front or what troops are on our flanks. We don't know which way the Japanese will be coming next. So we just face every direction and hope. Everything is chaotic. Nobody seems to know where his unit is anymore. Finally, the British commanders agree that with the water supply nearly gone, short on food, gasoline, and their troops exhausted, counterattack is impossible. It's a great relief when the fighting stops, but we ought not surrender. We ought to fight them back. All we need is a few aircraft, and we could push them off the island and all the way back up Malaya. We've heard lots of stories about the Japanese. The one thing impressed in my mind is not to be taken prisoner by them, because their treatment is uncivilized by our standards. Overall, we feel ashamed. We failed in our job. We were responsible for this wonderful fortress, and we let everybody down. What will our friends and family think of us? Even if we live, how can we ever hold up our heads again? Instead of the traditional victory parade, Yamashita ordered his men to pass through the city in silence, carrying boxes containing the ashes of the dead. In a moment, the conclusion of our story. Sergeant Kiyomitsu Miyake stays in Singapore for 6 months. Later, he returns to Manchuria, where he does garrison duty. John Samways is one of 60,000 British soldiers taken prisoner by the Japanese. He will spend 3.5 years in a Japanese labor camp. British spent nearly 20 years building the fortress of Singapore. The Japanese conquered it in 70 days. Many were sure that the war would now end in Japanese victory. But the British have an old expression: we can afford to lose all the battles but the last one.
When the war ended, like every Japanese soldier who fought in the Philippines, I expected to be brought back for the war crimes trial and executed. I never dreamed I would come to live in the country of my enemy.
In 1941, Isao Mukai was a second lieutenant in the Japanese Army. Today, he is a gardener in Southern California. Manuel Mabunga is an administrator with a government agency in Los Angeles. In 1941, he was a corporal in the Philippine Scouts.
I tried 3 times to escape from the Bataan death march. I was captured and made to dig my own grave. Most of the people in the march thought the sentence was carried out and told my family I was dead.
At the start of the Pacific War, in the battle for the Philippines, the lives of Manuel Mabunga and Isao Mukai came together for a brief moment. 2 fighting men, 1 Filipino, 1 Japanese, relived that moment in history. The Philippines, the strategic heartland of the Far East. Less than 300 miles from Japanese bases in Formosa. Over 5,000 miles from American bases at Pearl Harbor. To the Japanese, the Philippines mean only one thing: a base to be captured, a power to be destroyed. The prize of victory? Manila Bay, strategically located, one of the finest natural harbors in the Orient. July 1941. With war clouds gathering in the Pacific, General Douglas MacArthur arrives in the Philippines to command the American Army in the Far East. MacArthur is no stranger to the Philippines. He has already served 10 years on the islands. MacArthur calls up the Philippine Reserve to active duty. American officers are brought in to train them in a hurry. Washington now gives the Philippines top priority. MacArthur has promised that by April 1942, he will have all the men and equipment he needs. The race with time begins. Half of the American Army is Filipino. a corps of hard, well-trained men called the Philippine Scouts. Among them, a 20-year-old private, Manuel Mabunga.
We get the same training as the American Army, but we are paid less money, about $9 in American currency. Our own training becomes more difficult. We are required to march 30 to 50 miles with full combat equipment. The morale of the American and Philippine soldier training side by side is quite good. We know from training that something is brewing somewhere, but with the strength of the United States behind us, we don't think war will ever come to the Philippines.
By the end of November 1941, nearly 300 planes have arrived in the Philippines, but more than half of them are not equipped for combat. Anti-aircraft defenses are noticeably lacking. Throughout the islands, only 2 radar sets are operational. The Philippine Army now boasts nearly 100,000 men on active duty, but most of them have not even fired a single shot in target practice. December 8, 1941. On the other side of the international date line, the Japanese have just attacked Pearl Harbor. The news puts the Philippines on combat alert. Ready or not, the United States is at war. All American planes are ordered into the air. From bases in Formosa, Japanese planes now head for the Philippines. They were to strike Iba and Clark Fields right after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. But bad weather has thrown their attack 6 hours behind schedule. The Japanese are worried. They fear they have lost the element of surprise. They are afraid the Americans are expecting them.
There is a warning that enemy planes are approaching. The plane is quite high, but soon we find out it's a friendly airplane, so everybody can relax.
After more than 3 hours in the air, the American planes have made no contact with the Japanese. Relieved, they return to their bases for refueling. While the American crews break for lunch, Japanese planes approach Clark Field. Surprise attack is devastating. In simultaneous raids on Clark and Iba Fields, more than 100 planes are completely destroyed. On the first day of war, the Far East Air Force, the backbone of the Philippine defense, is broken. Next target, the American naval base at Cavite. Japanese bombers, beyond the range of American guns, have a field day. Without air cover, Manila Bay becomes a death trap. What's left of the American fleet is forced to run for its life or be blasted out of the water. In command of the air, the Japanese begin landings on the northern island of Luzon, meeting little resistance. Within 3 weeks, a Japanese invasion force, less than half the size of the combined American and Philippine armies, is driving toward the capital city, Manila.
I shall never forget this Christmas in the Philippines. The spirit of Christmas is of tender words, but instead of men bringing peace and goodwill, we are here to kill.
With no help possible from the Navy and his Air Force shot to pieces, MacArthur feels the defense of Manila is hopeless. He declares it an open city and orders his men to pull back to the ultimate defense area, Bataan.
It is difficult to evacuate your own home ground. How will our families defend themselves? What will happen to them? The enemy will first contact with them.
The Japanese victory plan is ahead of schedule. Only 25 days after the invasion, Japanese troops pour into Manila. The Japanese find no American troops in the city. The military installations destroyed. The supplies gone. The American withdrawal is regarded as an admission of defeat. Imperial headquarters considers the Philippine campaign virtually over. One entire division is ordered out to Java, and a small brigade of older men scheduled for garrison duty is brought in to mop up. One of these men is a 39-year-old veteran of the China campaign, Second Lieutenant Isao Mukai.
私は中隊長に任命された。I am assigned as a company commander, but there are only 30 soldiers to the company. Every company is under strength. We are part of a mixed brigade, composed of soldiers from various parts of Japan. Most of the men are too old for battle. One man is over 50. We are not well trained. Our equipment is poor. We are ordered to attack the enemy who has retreated to Bataan. We are greatly disappointed. It is no honor to be sent into battle when the war is almost over. We will not have a chance to render meritorious service to our country. Certainly we are confident, and we have no doubt of the outcome.
We pull back to Bataan. Here, we set up our main battle line and fortify it with everything we can. We have the support of heavy artillery. The plan is simple. Hold the Japanese at all costs.
The Japanese expect little resistance. The victory, they feel, is already theirs. They await a surrender. The Americans have a different idea. January 8, 1942. Misjudging the American positions and greatly underestimating the American strength, the Japanese push into Bataan. The first day, they meet little opposition. Their commander reports, the Americans have made a general withdrawal and fled into the jungle without a fight. He is wrong.
They are only 200 yards away from our front line. We wait for them to come up. When we see their helmets moving, we concentrate our fire in that direction. Our mission is to hold them as long as we can.
We are pinned down and cannot go forward. The enemy fire is very accurate. They seem to know our exact movements. It is no match in firing. If we fire one shot and raise smoke, they fire a dozen right back. I see several people blown to pieces. I tell myself, this is probably the end. We are not able to find out where the enemy is. We try to locate the American positions as their guns are fired. But each time, the firing starts from another direction. If we could only charge with our bodies, they would easily come out and surrender with their hands up.
The smoke from the gun gives me some sort of encouragement. Come what may, I'm determined to fight back as hard as I can. We fight just a delaying action. We are on half ration now, so we are in bad shape. But we know they are in bad shape too. We know they have been paralyzed. We know we can handle them.
As long as the Japanese control the sea and the air and can reinforce their men at will, no American counterattack can win. The American task is clear: to fight a defensive war, using as few men and supplies as possible. To fight not for victory, but for time.
I remember questioning this Filipino who said he was gathering food for his family. Then he signaled the Japanese to fire on us. I fired on this man who was running back behind the line. I never realized that my rifle would kill a man of my own race.
In a moment, the conclusion of our story. After the Battle of Bataan, Lieutenant Isao Mukai is put in charge of a prisoner of war camp in the northern Philippines. In 1943, he returns to Japan on garrison duty. As the war ends, he is training the Home Defense Corps with bamboo spears. Corporal Manuel Mabunga escapes from the death march, hides in the mountains till he regains his strength, then fights with a guerrilla movement for nearly 2 years. In 1945, he joins with the American forces liberating the Philippines. The military victory at the Philippines was clearly Japanese. But the Americans and Filipinos who fought at Bataan and Corregidor occupy a glorious place in American history. They fought with courage when defeat was certain.